Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. Andrew here, and today is another music theory breakdown where I recreate popular songs, sometimes by request, so that you can better understand music theory. It's really not as complicated as a lot of methods or people make it seem. And today, this one is by request. Shout out to the YouTube channel WebZHH for requesting 97 Bonnie and Clyde, an Eminem throwback. Let's go ahead into the session. So if you haven't seen one of these before, I'm not going to play any of the original audio. That's because I don't have the copyright permission to do that, and I want this video to keep living so you can keep learning from this. I'm going to go ahead and play my version. I've recreated every element. You're not hearing a single sample from the song. I will then go through where these notes come from and all the different layers. And finally, if you find these helpful, you would help me out a lot by subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, here is my shorter edit of 97 Bonnie and Clyde. One more time with the hook. Cool. So hopefully you enjoyed that, especially you, WebZHH. It was a really fun one to recreate. Thanks again for the request. So that's a lot shorter than the original, but since you're not hearing any vocals, it'd be kind of boring to have the full arrangement. I did it an 8-bar intro, 16-bar verse, 8-bar hook, 16-bar verse, 8-bar hook. This, after the sound effect section in the beginning, is the same structure as the song. So let's go ahead into some music theory. Music theory is a fancy way of saying the sort of where notes come from. Talks about chords, scales, different rhythms, modes, gives us a vocabulary to describe things that most of you who like music probably intuitively already understand. So this one is in a pretty simple key. That's helpful for this. We're in the key of A minor. If you have my music theory text linked below, I basically tell you that A minor is your reference key, or whenever you're in a minor key, we always think of A minor. It's the simplest. The reason it's the simplest is that it only has white keys. So from A to A, you would get this A natural minor. Sounds like this. Now, the one most common change to a standard minor scale like that is to take the second to last note, or the 7th scale degree, and to raise it. That then becomes what we call the leading tone. That note is a G sharp, and we find that in one chord. And this is really common in, I had a music history professor who once said that most pieces of music that we say are in a minor key are actually in a harmonic minor. Without that one note changing, the 5 chord built on the 5th scale degree, in this case E, would be minor. And so it doesn't have the same dominant feel that the word would use to describe it. So a lot of times that is an E major chord, which is made possible by changing this one note. Cool. So the chords from any scale are pretty simple. You basically get them by skipping scale degrees. So the 1 chord is skipping from A to C to E. So that has A, C, and E, and we call that chord an E minor. This next chord I have, this is that major 5 chord. So E, G sharp, B. Once again, I'm actually incorrect. I was jumping the gun. So this one, D, F, A. This is the 4 chord. This is a D minor chord. Up here, this is the E major chord. We've got E, G sharp, and B. Once again, this G sharp is not in our A natural minor, but we find it a lot of times. And on a side note, all of the Eminem catalog, the Dr. Dre, the Scott Storch stuff. Scott Storch, incredibly gifted piano player and producer, and he uses harmonic minor in a lot of his stuff. Finally, we get an F major or a C major chord, so C, E, and G. This is called the 3rd because C is the 3rd note in the scale. All right. And then finally, this is a weird chord. We get a diminished 2nd chord. So this is a B diminished chord. It is the top half of a G7, or the top 3 notes of a G7 chord, which is the dominant harmony to this chord that comes before, the C major chord. This is a really dissonant chord. I'll play them for you. So here's our A minor. Here's our D minor. Here's our E major. Here's our C major. And then finally, here's the B diminished. Very, very weird, unusual chord. It's very dissonant. It's much more clashing or dissonant than a typical minor chord. So let's go ahead through all the different sections. So one of the most unique things about recreating this track was trying to recreate the record scratch sound. Shout out to Splice. I am using a Splice sample. It's the 420 V3 FX classic record scratch. So if you have Splice, you can find that sound. And I flexed that or got it into time, and then I basically sampled it. So that is the sound that sounds like this. All right, it's a huge part of the intro of the song, and we hear it happening in fills, so at the end of every group of 4 in the verse and the hook. Cool. So the next layer I'll talk about is our pads. These are really, really low in the mix. You hear them very subtly, and they really provide the texture that the bass is the hottest thing in the mix here. And basically what's happening for 4 measures, we just get whole notes, the 1 chord, so A, C, and E, an A minor chord. Then the next 4, we get an A minor chord. We get that D minor chord, so the 4. We come up to E early, but that's anticipating this right here, which is that 5, that major chord, so E major. Then finally, we get the C major chord. And last but not least, that very strange B diminished chord. Altogether, that with our record scratch sounds like this. Cool. Then it drops. Let's add our bass in. So our bass, we don't have a single note that is outside of the white keys, so it's all doing some notes from the key of A minor. The main thing it's doing is an A, C, E, so this arpeggio, so it goes A, C, E, Then it goes A, C, B. That repeats A, C, E. And then in the intro, last time we get it, we just get A, A, A. This is really common in like build-ups before dance music drops or anytime a section's about to change. Holding a chord, holding a note longer can kind of create some suspense that it does really well there. All right. The second half of this bass line, this is happening when the chords start to change. We're going D, B, E. That's why we have that. These two are when we have the D minor chord. This one is with the piano note where we get to E a little bit early. Creates what we would call a suspended harmony, but not the most, don't want to bog us down with that. So we've got the notes D, B, E. Then we get an F, C, B right here. Then we get that same phrase, D, B, E. Then we get a B, C, A. This phrase right here is outlines a lot of like what the bass does the whole time. Let's hear that intro while we watch the bass. Cool. And then that next bass line you're hearing is when the actual drums start. So we get the same notes that we had before. We just fill it in a little bit with the kick drum, especially on the first four. So we just get an extra E note. The last notes that are playing, we're getting extra versions of that. Cool. Let's now go ahead into our drums. So our drums, we are at 92 beats per minute. We have what's called a standard backbeat. In other words, the snare in this case is hitting on beats 2 and 4. It's happening the entire time. The cymbals are steady eighth notes. I have a very, very subtle amount of swing, like what quantizing would call like 15 or 18 swing. Very, very subtle, hard to even hear it, but it goes a long way to mimic this kind of vibe. And then finally, our kick drum is the most crazy. We get a lot of dotted rhythms in the song. So we're hitting on the 1, and then we're hitting on the 4th 16th note, and then on the 2nd 8th note. This rhythm right here is super common. We could call that quarter note triplets. We could also call this a dotted 8th, the 16th, tied into an 8th, followed by an 8th note. This is really common, and that's the same rhythm that the bass is doing. This is really common in lots of different styles of music, but the bass guitar and the kick drum a lot of times are hitting together, either literally at the same time or one hits or the other, and they're very, very the closest related to sounds in most instrumentals. So we get those rhythms I talked about. Then we're getting a kick on our 8th note after beat 3. Then we get an 8th note on the very last 16th note. That 4-bar kick drum pattern repeats for most of the song. Altogether, those drums and the bass sound like this. All right, moving along, we have this additional instrument that I have 2 instruments actually playing. I've got Logic's top end organ and Logic's bright suitcase. They're playing the same pitch. Mostly what they're doing is the one note, so A, A, A. It sounds like this from the intro. It's the A, A, A right here. Same thing happens again. Get this one additional phrase on the same instruments, D, F, E. This is very, very similar to what's happening in the bass over that time. So we got D, B, E. Instead of the B, we get an F. But those 2 notes, that's the flatted 5th. That's part of the dominant chord there. Sorry to use too crazy of terminology. And then finally, that pattern repeats The second time in the verse, we get a slight variation. It's going to D, E, D, E, and then it goes B, C, D. That, again, we hear in the verse, but not in the intro. All right, cool. The last section to talk about, I also have a Bright Suitcase playing it. It is sort of the lead melody. It's doubling up the same thing the bass is doing on the same rhythm. So A, C, E. Then we're going A, C, F, E, D. All right, this is what I would call the main melody from the song. It's really low in the mix, so bear with me. We'll hear that added in. So turning that up just so you can hear it better, it's this. Cool. So that takes care of our intro, and it also takes care of missing one element. So in the very intro, it's the only time we hear these tom fills. I am using heavy default Logic drums. We get 2 rack toms in a row, 30-second notes, and then down to a floor tom. That's actually, I think, a kick drum, but in the song, I think it's a floor tom. That sounds like this. So once again, those tom fills, you'll hear them in the intro once the music starts in the song. We don't hear them other points of the song, I don't believe. And it's just an additional layer that kind of makes it more dramatic. Sounds like a band sort of like warming up before they fully start playing. All right, the last thing to go through is the hook. Now, I'll kind of go through each layer. Our bass line has not changed. It's our pads and melody that has changed. All of this stuff in the second 4 measures is identical. In the first 4 measures, where we were just holding the 1 chord, now we're doubling up the similar melody to what we had in the beginning. So the top line is going C, D, C, and then E, D, C. Now, one thing that music theory really helps us to do is like identify similarities between different sections within a single song, and this is something that's really common regardless of the genre of music we talk about. So this is that same rhythm that I called quarter note triplets, or a dotted eighth tied to dotted eighth, then 16th tied to an eighth, then an eighth note. Very common. That's what the bass is doing. The kick drum's doing that. The first melody, the last thing I showed you, is doing that same rhythm. So it would make sense that we find that rhythm. We could even call that rhythm like thematic to the actual song. Cool. So if you've seen my recent videos, you've seen me battle my mic stand. Help subscribe to the channel. I'll get monetized, and I will upgrade some of this equipment. Thank you to all my early supporters. I will never forget you. So if I come in here to the Bright Suitcase, this is the loudest thing in the mix. It's doing musically the same stuff. Let's listen to that channel actually on its own. Sounds like this. Cool. That with everything else sounds like this. The one subtle thing that I haven't showed you yet is a delay print. So this is a common technique. If you only want delay on part of a sound, so at the very end of the hook, we hear this bright instrument, sounds like an organ to my ears, that does that rhythm. I'm showing you the A on eighth notes and then the D, F. That we hear delayed. The very end, the notes are going B, C on eighth notes. So what I did was I bounced that region in place. That then allowed me to just use the delay on this audio. It's easier on my computer. It's a half note speed, so tied to the rhythm of the track. I am filtering it subtly, so low pass filter. Not much happening there. If you listen to that end, it that sound kind of like brings us back into the verse sections. So this second half of the beat is identical to the first, has the same verse into the same chorus. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer those. Hopefully you found that a helpful way to understand this classic Eminem track. Thanks again to WebZHH for the recommendation or the request. If you have a song you'd like to see me break down, I love a challenge. Let me know in the comments. I will do my best to get that video out in a timely fashion. I'm pretty proud of myself getting this one out within a week of the WebZHH's request. So once again, my name is Andrew. I am obsessed with music. I play a lot of guitar. I make a lot of music. I have music on television. I work for artists. I am an artist myself. I like to cover all sorts of different things music related on the channel. If you have any other topics you'd like to see me cover, I'm also all ears. So thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Go make some music, and I will see you next time. Cheers.